Merci. Excellencies, colleagues, it's a pleasure to introduce 10 written reports of the Secretary General and High Commissioner for Human Rights on a range of thematic issues to be considered under items 2, 3, and 8. I would like to start with the Secretary General's report to the Human Rights Council on measures taken to implement Human Rights Council Resolution 9.8 and obstacles to its implementation, including recommendations for further improving the effectiveness of, harmonizing, and reforming the treaty body system, report of the Secretary General, which falls under the item 2 of the agenda. This report has been overtaken by the General Assembly Resolution 68-268 on strengthening and enhancing the effective functioning of the treaty body system. The reporting obligations under HRC Resolution 9.8 and GA Resolution 68-268 are very similar. Pursuant to GA Resolution 75-174, the Secretary General submitted his 5th biennial report on the status of the treaty body system in September 2024. This report contains all the information requested by HRC Resolution 9.8. I would now like to introduce the report of the Secretary General on missing persons submitted to the General Assembly pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 77-220 and then referred to the Human Rights Council. The report details the international legal and institutional framework and measures taken by states to address the issue of missing persons, including legislative and other measures to prevent individuals from going missing, and measures to clarify the fate and whereabouts of missing persons. It also covers the situation of missing children, criminal investigations, their forensic recovery and identification of remains, and the legal status of missing persons and support for families. The report concludes that states and other relevant stakeholders have continued to take measures regarding missing persons. However, the prevalence of missing persons, including children, and their impact on families remains a serious concern. The report reiterates previous recommendations and urges states to enable the meaningful participation of families in search and investigations, and to ensure the protection of families and all individuals involved in the search and accountability processes, including human rights defenders, civil society organizations, and lawyers, against threats and violence. It calls on states to recognize the central role that women and girls play in the search for missing persons and to address their specific needs. The report also makes recommendations to strengthen the capacity of the medico-legal institutions to adequately document unidentified deceased persons and to establish National Information Bureau in peacetime as a preventive measure. In addition, it encourages states to become parties to the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance and other relevant human rights treaties, and to ensure their full implementation. Next, I would like to draw attention to the Secretary General's report on the United Nations Voluntary Fund for Victims of Torture. This report highlights the needs of people subjected to torture worldwide and the role of the fund in supporting access to rehabilitation and other vital services. In 2024, 188 annual grants were awarded in 92 countries, amounting to more than $8 million and assisting more than 49,000 victims of torture. In addition, the fund provided financial support amounting to just over $400,000 for 8 emergency grants to deliver critical services to an estimated 5,540 torture survivors and their family members in 7 countries. In 2025, the Board of Trustees awarded annual grants to 182 organizations providing direct assistance to victims and to 5 organizations strengthening service provision. The grants totaled $8 million and, as I said, benefited 56,000 victims in 92 countries. Despite efforts since 2024 to diversify the donor base, the funding gap remains significant, with currently a shortfall of $7.69 million. As a consequence, the fund was unable to assist 71 organizations supporting 54,000 victims and their families, and 14 organizations aiming to build the capacity of service providers. And unfortunately, that gap threatens to be much worse going forward. In addition to the funding gap, the report noted the challenges faced by grantees as a result of shrinking civic space, affecting their ability to provide direct assistance to victims of torture, including in emergency situations. Grantees face risks, including physical risks, as well as disbursement challenges, including through the use of restricted foreign funding legislation. In response, the fund awarded emergency grants, and the board nominated a focal point for reprisals. I would also like to present the Secretary General's report on a special fund established by the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, and Degrading Treatment or Punishment. Support provided through the special fund is directed towards projects aimed at establishing or strengthening national preventive mechanisms, thereby contributing to the implementation of the relevant recommendations made by the subcommittee following a visit by a state party. In 2024, grants amounting to more than $300,000 were awarded to support 11 torture prevention projects in 10 state parties during their implementation in 2025. These projects will, among others, strengthen the capacity of members of national preventive mechanisms as well as judicial officials, magistrates, law enforcement officials, prison officials, police, schools, students, and other stakeholders in torture prevention. Second, increase the visibility of national preventive mechanisms. Third, provide for translation of key documents on torture prevention to local languages. And fourth, advocate for legislative changes concerning treatment of persons in detention. The report underscores the dire financial situation of the special fund and urges states to provide the fund with financial support it requires. Turning now to the High Commissioner's report on the rights of persons belonging to national or ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities, submitted pursuant to Human Rights Council Resolution 5515. In the report, the High Commissioner concludes that in order to enhance the implementation of the Declaration on the Rights of Persons belonging to national or ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities, and to ensure the full enjoyment of the rights of persons belonging to minorities, states should first advance the adoption and implementation of comprehensive anti-discrimination laws, and second, develop and put into practice effective anti-discrimination measures and policies aimed at both effectively eliminating all forms of discrimination against persons belonging to such minorities and strengthening advocacy against discrimination. The High Commissioner also reiterates that political and religious leaders should speak out firmly and promptly against all incitement to violence and hatred. Next, the Secretary General's report on the question of the realization in all countries of economic, social, and cultural rights, with a special focus on challenges and good practices to strengthen the fulfillment of the right to Social Security, is submitted pursuant to Resolution 5211. In this report, the Secretary General outlines states' obligations in relation to the realization to the right to Social Security and highlights the critical role of the right to Social Security in reducing and alleviating poverty, promoting social inclusion, and advancing the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. While progress has been made, gaps remain. The Secretary General recommends that states ratify international conventions ensuring human rights-based Social Security systems that are inclusive, adequate, and accessible for all, particularly for vulnerable groups such as children, older persons, persons with disabilities, and informal workers. States are urged to prioritize gender-responsive policies, improve fiscal measures, and support international cooperation to close funding gaps. In addition, the Secretary General calls for continuous investment in Social Security systems, strengthening tax systems, and promoting the transition of informal workers to formal economies. The establishment of an international financing mechanism for social protection is also proposed to support global efforts. The upcoming Second World Summit for Social Development offers an opportunity to reaffirm commitments and to further advance the realization of economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to Social Security, ensuring no one is left behind in the pursuit of sustainable development. The High Commissioner's comprehensive report on mental health and human rights was prepared pursuant to Resolution 5212. It contains an analysis of the main obstacles and challenges in applying a human rights-based approach to mental health. The report stresses the urgent need for systemic reform of mental health systems, focusing on models that shift away from a narrow emphasis on biomedical approaches towards a more holistic and inclusive understanding of mental health and a transition to community-based mental health care and support. This includes addressing stigma, ensuring access to equitable care, and empowering persons with psychosocial disabilities, users of mental health systems, and survivors of involuntary hospitalization in policymaking. This shift requires changes in legislation and policies to align with human rights standards, destigmatizing mental health services, eliminating coercive practices, investing in community-based services and cross-sectoral collaboration, ensuring informed consent for all mental health interventions, and addressing systemic inequalities. The next report on the impact of arms transfers on human rights examines gaps with respect to the role of states and the private sector to prevent, address, and mitigate the negative human rights impacts of arms transfers, including unregulated illicit arms transfers and diversion. The report notes that arms transfers are not a human rights-free zone. They can facilitate violations and abuses of international law, including of international human rights and humanitarian law. States in the private sector have obligations and responsibilities to prevent, address, and mitigate negative human rights impacts of arms transfers under these international laws provisions. The report examines 5 salient compliance gaps. These gaps relate to 1, the safeguards by states against transferring arms in violation of international law; 2, private sector respect for human rights and humanitarian law; 3, measures taken by states to prevent unlawful transfers by third states and third parties and private actors; and 4th, access to justice and effective remedies. In addition, the report highlights the persistent challenges of corruption and conflicts of interest in the arms sector. As a future step, the report recommends further research specifically on the first 4 of these gaps to identify practical measures and to find good practices to effectively prevent, address, and mitigate the negative human rights impact of arms transfers. Next, I would like to present the OHCHR report summarizing the expert seminar on the promotion and protection of economic, social, and cultural rights in anti-corruption efforts in the context of recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. The report makes clear that corruption and associated illicit financial flows pose a significant threat to many countries, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Corruption and illicit financial flows have a negative impact on the realization of all human rights, and corruption has a destructive effect on state institutions. Corruption is leaving behind people and communities experiencing discrimination and is far from a victimless action. During the seminar, it was suggested that a robust mandate and sufficient budgetary resources to track state progress in relation to the Advisory Committee's 2015 recommendations on the negative impact of corruption on human rights was appropriate. It was recommended that OHCHR act upon those recommendations and enhance its work on the prevention of corruption and associated illicit financial flows through the provision of guidance and technical assistance to states to align their anti-corruption efforts with human rights obligations. The last report I'd like to present today is the High Commissioner's report on the human rights dimensions of care and support. The report analyzes existing international human rights standards applicable to the rights of those providing care and support, and the rights of those requiring care and support, and the rights relevant to self-care, all topics that we hope will feature prominently in the upcoming Second World Summit for Social Development. Existing care systems are built on and perpetuate inequality and discrimination against women, persons with disabilities, children, young and older persons, and in particular those facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. In recognition of the interlinkages between the rights of those providing and requiring care and support, it is important to address the human rights of unpaid care and support givers, paid care and support workers, and people requiring care and support simultaneously throughout their life course. It is essential to invest in rights-based care and support systems as a basis for sustainable development, while recognizing the need for further clarification on rights, states' obligations, and business responsibilities in relation to some aspects of care and support. This includes self-care, resource mobilization and distribution, and the concept of care for the planet. I thank you for your attention.